This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, I guess I should say. 1 o'clock on the East Coast, where we're coming to you in the Meetinghouse, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I am your host, Dwight A. Moody. I'm the founder and host of the Meetinghouse. We publish a newsletter, and if you'd like to receive the newsletter each week, you can go to themeetinghouse.net and subscribe. It's a free subscription. It comes out on Wednesday evening. Much of the material that we use on the broadcast is also in the newsletter. I'm coming to you today from Greenville, South Carolina. My studio there. You know, we're sometimes in a different place every week, but we're broadcasting on a beautiful winter day. It's crisp and cool outside, blue skies, a big full sun out there, but it is winter weather. My guest today is a longtime friend of mine, Marshall Davis, coming from New Hampshire. Marshall, I'm going to assume that you are in New Hampshire today. What's the weather? Welcome to the Meetinghouse.
Thank you, Dwight.
What's the weather like in New Hampshire?
We're actually having a February thaw right now. It's been above zero be above freezing during the day for a few days this week. So our snow is starting to melt a little bit. I hear the summer going.
You've had a lot of snow over the last several weeks.
Yeah, we have had quite a bit of snow. Yeah, but right now it's not too bad. It's supposed to maybe a snow shower this afternoon a little bit, but that's about it.
Marshall Davis, the Reverend Dr. Marshall Davis, is an author, a columnist like myself. He also has a YouTube channel. You can watch his material there. And we're here today to talk about Christian nationalism, something he and I both are very concerned about. But before we do that, I have the news of the week. And Marshall and I are going to talk about the news. As always, the news is brought to you by Perfecto Coffee of California. You can order your coffee from perfectocoffeeinc.com. I'm going to send some to Dr. Marshall, as I do all of my guests. And I encourage you to go to the website and order some coffee. We have 5 news stories today in the Meetinghouse. The first, Pope Francis has tapped Bishop Shelton Faber as the new Archbishop of Louisville, a city with a history of racial trouble. Faber is a black man from Louisiana. He is currently the Bishop of Houma-Thibodaux in Louisiana, that is due west of New Orleans. He succeeds Joseph Kurtz, who, as is customary, turned in his resignation retirement letter to the Pope when he turned 75 last fall. Bishop Faber serves as chair of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops ad hoc committee against racism and has led the writing of the U.S. Bishop's most recent pastoral letter on racism. The Louisville Archdiocese serves 24 counties in Kentucky with almost 200,000 parishioners. Marshall, do you know any of the Catholic bishops up there in New Hampshire?
No, I'm afraid I don't have. We're very rural. There's one Catholic congregation that I'm aware of, about 15 miles away, but I don't have much contact with even the priest anymore. I used to when I was an active pastor. We used to do services together as far as ecumenical things, but besides that, I don't.
Well, I reported on this story today because Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, who just retired, has been a close friend of mine.
Oh, okay.
He was one of the very first people who came on board when I launched the Academy of Preachers in 2008. He spoke and brought greetings when we had our first National Festival of Young Preachers And he actually sponsored 2 years of the national festivals in the Cathedral of the Assumption in downtown Louisville. I even preached a sermon in the cathedral, and the pastor there is still a good friend of mine. And Bishop Kurtz was for 2 years the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. In fact, he was the chief host when Pope Francis came to the United States on his pastoral visit. I think that was 2015. So he's been very near and dear to me, and I think he's actually retiring over here in North Carolina. So I've been very interested in who his replacement was going to be, given the racial history and giving my personal connection there to the archdiocese. We'll see how this new archbishop from Louisiana does in the racial tension that has been so dominant there in Louisville. Especially over the last year with the death, some say would murder, of Breonna Taylor. Well, let's go out to Kansas City, Missouri. Between July 1 of 2020 and October 17th of 2021, that was last fall, 100 Baptist pastors in one of the progressive Baptist denominations participated in a survey about why they had resigned their pastoral duties. Of these, 80% noted that COVID was either a contributing or significant factor in their decision. Quote, "The additional duties of becoming a technical wizard was exhausting," one said. Another said, "Our online service was robust and well done. I was doing most of the editing, but I was working 55 to 60 hours a week, and that quickly became unsustainable," end quote. Yet when asked to rank factors that contributed to the resignation, COVID was not the highest rank. Opposition to leadership was. More than half of the participants ranked opposition to leadership as the first, second, or third factor contributing to their leaving. Marshall, there's been a lot of commentary and a lot written over the last year about the resignations, not just in ministry, but in every profession. Right. But certainly in the ministry. Do you know people who have left the ministry in the last couple of years because of the unique set of factors that we've experienced?
I know people that have talked to me about the opposition that they have had from the leadership within their churches, and they feel under stress and under strain from that. I don't know of any that who have actually left the ministry these last couple of years, but I think this whole idea of the opposition to leadership, or by leadership, however that was phrased there, is a long-term problem. I think it's a lot older than just the pandemic, or even just since the 2016 election of Donald Trump and all that divisiveness that has happened since then. But I certainly think it has accelerated and it has become worse since then. I mean, I've noticed even the opposition, even though I retired in 2016 before the election. I felt like I retired just in time. But even after that, I mean, I was getting, even though I was out of active ministry as far as church ministry is concerned, I was still getting opposition from people, and that I did not have when I was in ministry. So I can only imagine what people that are taking a paycheck from churches were experiencing.
Well, it is true that since the 2016 election, in all organizations, especially public organizations, I'm thinking here like school boards and things like that there's been a surge of opposition to leadership. And certainly the COVID has made that more intense. But I wonder, Marshall, if the broad decline in church affiliation and attendance has created anxiety in congregations, and they've taken this out on their leadership.
I'm sure that's the case. The decline in the attendance accompanied by, to a certain extent, a decline in contributions. As you probably know, contributions have amazingly not declined the same
Right.
amount as attendance has, which
Right.
means that the old guard that has the older folks, our age and older, who have been the backbone of the giving, have continued to give even if they have not been attending.
It also may mean that the people that dropped out weren't given too much.
Right. True. And that is the case. We know that the younger you are, the less disposable income, you might say, that you have to be able to give to charities like this.
Well, the resignation problem is a problem all over. As you may know, Marshall, I am the interim pastor at a small congregation in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Their pastor resigned during the pandemic and actually left the ministry. They had an interim pastor who lasted about 9 months, and he resigned. I've been there 9 months, so I'm holding out for a year at least. They asked me in January if I was going to become their permanent pastor, and I said, well, that depends on how you behave. So we may be in somewhat of an engagement period, and if they behave all right and don't turn against me, I may stay longer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've noticed at the church that we attend right now that a lot of people have stopped coming to the service, not just because of the pandemic, but because of a difference of opinion on social justice issues with the pastor. And when this pastor leaves, I'm pretty sure that some of those will be coming back, but we will see.
I got a call this week from a member of this small congregation where I am, asking me to help her plan and host a regional conference for ministers about how to preach on these controversial issues, especially related to racial justice. Because everywhere it happens just like you described. People have different opinions that are expressed to school boards and in the workplace and in politics and in their churches, different understandings of our history, different judgments about what needs to be done. And people have gotten very touchy about it, if I might put it like that. They get very nervous when somebody puts forth a different strategy than what they believe in on both sides or on all sides of the issue.
Right.
I want to go down.
I think there's never been a time when it's as important to speak out on these issues as it is now. It would be very tempting to say, oh, we're just going to talk about spiritual things and not talk about these social issues or these even political issues. But anybody that knows scripture knows that these social justice issues and even having to do with political leadership is just, is part of scripture, Old Testament and New Testament. And you would have to censor, 90% of the Bible to speak just about so-called spiritual issues. And I just have to say that I'm really proud of the pastor of the church where we are attending now for sticking to it and in a compassionate and a open way, still doing prophetic preaching, even when it cost him, some points with people, and with denominational leadership.
Well, Marshall, you know that I'm almost 72. And when I took this little interim job, and I know some of my folks are listening and watching today, I have, like you have, all of our ministry, tried to be very careful in speaking the truth in love, and at the same time not causing disruption in churches and this sort of thing. And but at 72, I'm tired of having to watch everything I say about this, and of having to compromise what I believe, not only what I believe, but what I think the Bible teaches, and what I think Christ taught. And I just decided in this particular case, I was going to speak my mind, tell the truth as I see it, in as much love as I can. And, if they don't want an old man telling them the truth as he sees it, they can, I'm sure they will let me know, as congregations have a way of doing. I don't know whether you feel it. You've got a blog and a YouTube program where you say what you think, right?
Right, yeah. And of course, I've had to block these trolls sometime that will start posting things on my sites from all over the world. I mean, I've had these white supremacists that will do everything they can to be able to post, and I have to find a way to block that, just because of the hate is so fierce, and
it is.
You just wonder where this hate is coming from in these people's lives.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this as it relates to what we both call Christian nationalism. One of the first things that I look at every week when I look at the analytics on my newsletter is who has unsubscribed. And I try not to get discouraged about that, but I did have a person that I know unsubscribed this week, and I'm sure it was because of the strong things I said about Christian nationalism in my newsletter this week. But you have to have courage. At the same time, we have to have a pastoral heart and try to understand where people are coming from. Well,
you and I are pretty much the same age, and our ministries began the same time. And so our ministries began in the later 70s, probably, or so. And and never since we've started ministry has the nation been in the type of situation it is today. I mean, maybe if we had been active pastors during the civil rights movement, or even during the Vietnam War, that we could maybe not say that. But since we began our ministry really shortly after that, this is a new time for us, and never in our even lifetimes has the freedoms and even the democracy of our nation been at risk. And so if there's ever a time to speak in our lifetimes, this is the time to speak. And I think the real problem is that a lot of people are afraid to speak. A lot of pastors are afraid to speak, and rightly so, because they know it might mean the loss of their jobs. And for a lot of pastors, they aren't trained or equipped to do anything else. And so they have to step back, and they have to compromise. And so I sympathize with them greatly. And I'm glad that, I'm not, depending upon a church paycheck at this point in my life.
Yes. We have seen this hostility, like I've already mentioned, at school board meetings, at political rallies. We've seen it on television, on talk radio. This hostility toward people who see things differently. I believe you wrote a column last week or a couple of weeks ago that bears on this, that I want to bring up a little bit later. Let's go to San Antonio, Texas. In 2019, WellPath LLC hired an RN by the name of Melinda Babineau to work at the Central Texas Correctional Facility in San Antonio, Texas. Babineau informed the company, after she had accepted the job, informed their human resources team that her religious beliefs required her to wear a scrub skirt instead of the traditional scrub slacks or pants, in accordance with her convictions about modesty. The company declined to accommodate her request and rescinded the job offer. Babineau filed a complaint claiming religious discrimination. She won, and the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission said the company denied the nurse's right to religious accommodation and directed the corporation to compensate her $75,000. You know, the difference between a skirt and a pair of slacks is one more modest than the other. Do you think a skirt, we're both men, is a skirt on a woman more modest than slacks? I don't know I don't even know how to answer that question.
I know it.
But it shows you what difficulties corporations, public officials have in trying to navigate this emerging and very contentious realm of accommodating people's religious convictions. A number of these things have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. My program last week was about the dramatic shift at the Supreme Court in supporting people who claim religious discrimination. And one of the big issues that we're going to talk about in just a minute is the new definition of religious freedom. It used to be religious freedom was that you could go to the church where you wanted to and you could preach in your church what you wanted to. But now people have taken this idea of religious freedom and made almost every single thing that they do a part of their, quote, religion. From the clothing that they wear to the drugs that they take and all sorts of things. Whether, of course, the big issue recently has been whether religious people have to abide by public health protocols. And there's been a whole series of Supreme Court decisions on that as well. We'll talk about.
Yeah,
go ahead.
And even I just saw on the news at noon about some Navy personnel that were released from the Navy because they wouldn't take the vaccines.
Yes.
And so it's that is kind of mind-boggling itself. I mean, because I remember friends of mine when they were in the Vietnam War. I mean, they gave them all sorts of shots and didn't even tell them what they were, before they went to Vietnam. But now, and these people willing to risk their lives, in the military, but not take the chance to get a vaccine. I mean, that's where they would take their stand, which seems like a very strange place to take a stand. It just shows how this meme has really entered into all levels of our society, even the military.
Marshall, I don't think the resistance to the vaccine has anything to do with medicine or health. I think it's almost 100% a pushback against the federal government telling somebody what to do.
That's what people say, but I mean, I know people, family and good friends that are on the other side of this issue, and they will swear up and down that it really has to do with what they call bodily autonomy and the terrible dangers of the vaccines, to their lives and their children's lives. So they're talking different than just political here.
Well, of course, I'd have to ask them, have they taken the polio vaccine? Did they get their kids vaccinated when they went to school, when they were in the first grade? I think there are all kinds of ways to test the legitimacy of that stance of what people say, that it's, they're not sure about the vaccine. But, okay, now, here is the next story, Marshall. I'm sure you're going to know all about this one. This is from cyberspace. Last week, the Australian singer Peach PRC, that's a stage name, of course, a performance name, leaked a new song called God is a Freak. It immediately became a global hit. The artist called the song a tongue-in-cheek parody of some forms of Christianity with lyrics like, God is a bit of a freak. Like, what's the fixation on hating the way he creates? So why would I spend my eternity with God when he's a freak? End quote. The recording on TikTok has been downloaded millions of times already in less than a week and has been used by many as background music to describe their own history with conservative religion. The Reverend Carla Camastra, an interfaith pastor with over 500,000 TikTok followers, told Religion News Service, quote, "God is a freak is a song of liberation for this generation, and I applaud it," end quote. Others, of course, have a different opinion.
Of course,
Now,
I had never heard that song until I read your news, and of course, first thing I did was go on and listen to it, and listen to it in a form that had the lyrics, because it's not always easy to understand the lyrics in the songs, and it shows how language has changed. That freak here in this context is obviously a very bad thing. When I was younger, freak was not necessarily a bad thing.
That's
It was
right.
a good thing. But here, he's talking about the personality of the biblical God, at least the way it is interpreted by a lot of preachers.
Yes, and of course, it's. I think the song is a pushback against the song that I learned as a child. Be careful, little hands, what you do. There's a God up above who's looking down below. Be careful, little hands. Be careful, little feet, where you go. Be careful, mouth, for what you say. This idea that God is watching over us and making a list of our sins, like Santa Claus does on our bad behavior. This idea that God is concerned about these things in our life and holding us accountable for all of these things, like a peeping Tom, sort of. And this is the song is a pushback against this,
right?
And in that sense, there's a lot of legitimacy to it, I think. And like a lot of things in pop culture, it uses language that offends a lot of people.
It's a pushback against the purity culture and the obsession with sexuality that conservative Christianity has. Of all the things in our society that to be obsessed with what consenting adults do in private is really crazy. Especially when you're dealing with all the serious social issues that are happening in the world today and are addressed in Scripture. This is what they pick up on.
Yes, and of course, I grew up in this kind of culture, as perhaps you did, and it was a long time. These were the issues. The sexual behavior issues were the issues that my churches, when I was growing up, got very intense about, and they equated these with self-discipline and righteousness and Christian living. And I heard nothing about segregation and racism, or about war and peace, or about the Vietnam War. None of these things were talked about in church, but the sexual issues were. And it certainly is a distortion of an imbalance, we might say, in the moral vision of some churches, and this is a pushback against it, as you say, and rightly so. Well, that's all the news.
Now
go ahead.
You skipped over the one about the internet services.
I did. Read it to me. Read it to me.
All right. This is New York. 2 weeks ago, New York Times columnist Tish Harrison Warren wrote a piece entitled "Why Churches Should Drop Their Online Services." A practicing Christian, Warren wrote, "My church was one of the first in our city to forego meeting in person and switch to an online format. And I encourage other churches to do the same. Now, I think it's time to drop the virtual option. And I think this is the same. I think this for the same reason I believe churches should go online back in March 2020. This is the way to love God and our neighbors. Warren made her case, and her column provoked a swarm of response, which elicited another column about those responses, all of which illustrates the national conversation about how and when to retreat from the various COVID restrictions and return to normal life in church and elsewhere.
Well, did you read that original column, and
I did.
did you respond to it? Yeah.
I read the original column. I didn't read the backup column, although I did respond to it personally. When I read it, is that I did disagree with her with this column. That it's time to drop it. Now I understand the reasoning behind it, that we want to get back to normal, and that the importance of physically gathering together. That's very important for a Christian community, but I'm, as a pastor, a longtime pastor, I'm also very aware of people who are not able to gather in person. Throughout all of our ministerial lives, we've had people that we've brought, cassette tapes to, because they were homebound and they want to be part of the service. So we gave them tapes to listen to. And this is an opportunity for them to actually participate in the worship service while it's happening. Now, I normally go in person, but last Sunday we were not able to do that, but I worshiped online, and I was able to participate even then online with a asking for a prayer for something, So here it is, a person that can't be there in person is able to do that. And I think of not only elderly people, but people with all sorts of physical disabilities, or restrictions in their lives, and this is a way for them to connect. So I think it's wrong. I think they really ought to I think churches should not go back. They should allow this to be an option, even though it is very important to have that physical presence and sense of community.
I agree with you 100%. I feel this technology is like the radio at the end of the 19th century. It's like the television in the 20th century. This new technology is a way of taking our community and our gospel and our prayers out of the sanctuary into the world. And this is extremely important. Like you, our congregation is gathered. We have a very small congregation, and we normally have 2 or 3 times as many people watching online as we do in the sanctuary now. And this is good. It's kind of changed the way we do our worship service. In fact, we publish our order of worship on our website and encourage people to download it and have it in their hands when they're watching online, because we print the text of all the prayers and the text of the hymns and some of the scripture text, all of it, so that they can participate with us as much as possible. But I do agree with you. I think there's no going back. And I suspect in not too many years that there's going to be another breakthrough in distribution technology that the churches will have to embrace.
Well, there already is.
Yes.
I don't know if you've been reading about the VR and the metaverse.
Yes. Yes.
The VR church, that you can actually, wear one of these visors and be part of virtual reality in a cathedral with other people. So you can actually be physically present while not physically present. So this is, and some people are just doing this exclusively as part of their spiritual experience. So this is, the future is now. This is, and we're going to have to continue to be part of that, I think.
For the last 20 or 30 years, I think, or at least 20 years, many of the bigger churches have had multiple campuses using the screen and one preacher. I know here in here where we are, there is a large church called Grace Church, 7 or 8 campuses all around Greenville, South Carolina. One preacher, and he's on the screen in all of these regional campuses. And that's kind of a blend of being with your people and not being with your people. Again, it is the use of technology to try to do our work and be faithful to it.
Right.
Yes, I don't anticipate our little church giving up. As a matter of fact, Sunday we're going to vote on a budget that allocates money to upgrade our equipment, and I hope and anticipate that there'll be a good spirit about that. Well, that's the news from the Meeting House this week, brought to you by Perfecto Coffee Inc. of California. Go to perfectocoffeeinc.com and order some coffee. You can tell them that you heard about it on the Meeting House. We'll be back in just a minute. Stay tuned for our conversation on Christian nationalism and American democracy. I'm Dwight Moody with Marshall Davis in the Meeting House. Thank you for joining us today in the Meeting House. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody, here with my longtime friend and first-time guest in the Meeting House, the Reverend Dr. Marshall Davis, coming to us from a place in the country where there is real snow. That's New Hampshire.
Yes, there is.
It feels like it could snow down here, but I'm looking out of the window in front of me and beautiful blue skies and just a very calm wind out there. Marshall, I've just finished reading this book. I published a review of it in the newsletter and on the website this week, The Power Worshippers, Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism by Catherine Stewart. When I was halfway through the book, I wrote her, and I'll tell you this little story. I wrote her, invited her to be on my show. She said, I'd love to do that. In the exchange, I told her that I was in Hendersonville, North Carolina. She wrote back and said, well, I am going to be in Hendersonville at the end of March. Why don't we wait till then and do it in person? Great. I thought, well, that's terrific. I did not ask her why she was coming, but it turns out that she had been in dialogue, in email dialogue, while I was dialoguing with her in an email. She'd been dialoguing with another person in Hendersonville, North Carolina, about coming to our town and giving a speech under the auspices of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. As soon as she told me this, I thought, well, I bet I know who she's talking with. His name, well, he's a man, Philip Allen, who's a member of my church. Oh. I mean, we don't have maybe a dozen men in our church. He's one of them. That's about the number of men I know in the whole county. And it turns out that's exactly what she had been happening. And so the two of us compared notes. I picked up the phone and called him immediately. And he confirmed my hunch. And so we're putting together, she's going to be in town for 3 or 4 days, I think, the last week of March, which also corresponds to my birthday, by the way, on March the 30th. And she's going to be on the show. But I'm doing a series now focused on this Christian nationalism, because I have described it as the most consequential religious movement in the United States today. How do you respond to that?
I would agree with you. It really is. I think we're starting to realize now this has been building up for years, if not decades. We're not even really was not really aware of that. I saw, maybe you did, the PBS documentary on Billy Graham, and it talked about how his friendship with presidents kind of set the groundwork for what we're seeing today. Even though he did not intend it to be like this, it actually did pave the way for this. And so that made it very much easier for me to understand how his son could be part of this. And so
You remember? Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
You remember also when we were young ministers, the launch of the moral majority and the language of the culture war, using that war language to push back against, first against a series of changes in our culture, and then against the role of the federal government in making these changes a matter of public and national law. Yes, you are exactly right, Marshall. This all started 50, 60, 70 years ago and has been building for decades until finally, as we might say, it erupted into public view under the watch care of President Trump, don't you think?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Although I think he's more of a product of it. He just happened to be the right person or the wrong person, depending how you look at it, at the right time in history. He could have been elected president 10 years before, but he could then, because everything was right, especially because it came right after a black president. So you had all this backlash and all this fear that was coming to the surface, and that's how he got elected. Yeah.
He was sitting on the sidelines and saw the parade coming down the street, and he got out in front of the parade and marched in front of it.
Right.
But you're right.
Yeah, and that's why I really think. I mean, he is not really, a Christian,
right?
and so Christian nationalism is not his thing, but he's willing to play their tune, if he can have the money, sex, and power that he likes so much.
That's right. He is a power worshiper.
Yes, right.
To use the title of the book, but he hasn't been a part of the religious movement at all until he saw it as an opportunity to help himself get elected as president. And of course, it shocked all of us. Well, it shocked me. I'm sure it shocked you that he was elected. And then all of this, of course, there was a great swath of the Christian community that saw his election as a God thing. And I've done several programs on this, the role of Christian prophecy, as they call it, in predicting the victory of Donald Trump.
Right. Now, Pat Robinson was the one who predicted that God was going to put him in power back in 2016. And that was, 4 years before all these other, Pentecostal, prophecies were being made about him being elected in 2020.
Yes. And of course, they prophesied he was going to be reelected when he did not get reelected. When you think God has ordained something and then it doesn't happen, you have to attribute that to some nefarious scheme. And of course, this is the epicenter of the great lie, as they call it. Well, how would you describe Christian nationalism?
I guess I would describe it as theocracy. I think it is based. I understand where they're coming from. That Old Testament, religion was a theocracy. Is understood that God, that the Lord was king, and that the earthly king was put there by God and to do God's will. So it's very understandable why people who are raised on this would believe that that's what God wants now for this special people Americans, because they think that we are kind of like the new Israel almost, that we are the city set on a hill, and that we have a special role to play in history. So it's simply taking this biblical imagery and the symbolism and transferring it over to America and Americans. So we are the new Israel, really, and Donald Trump is a new type of king, really, if not a new type of Messiah, an earthly Messiah. When I was talking about when I wrote about Trump being, the evangelicals' Messiah, I got a lot of pushback there because, he's not our Messiah. Jesus is our Messiah. And I said, yeah, that's true, but he's the earthly Messiah. Jesus is heavenly one up, seated at the right hand of God, in heaven. But Trump's the next thing, kind of. He's the one that's going to bring it about on earth. And by his appointment of the Supreme Court justices, he seems to be doing what they want. So it's only has reinforced them that this is a real possibility. So they're not going to give up. This is going to continue, for who knows, for the rest of our lifetimes, I think.
I think for the rest of our lifetime as well. Much of it comes out of let me put it this way: the person who systematized Rushdoony, who took this idea that you've just described, that the laws in the Bible have to apply to us in some way. He systematized this and laid out a system where this was feasible, and to how to take all these laws in the Old Testament and make them workable and practical in a modern democracy. And so I wrote about that last week, remembering the Rushdoony, as I called it. But another big piece of this, and this is what I want to talk about, is the idea of America being either a biblical nation or a Christian nation. So, Marshall, in what sense can we call the United States a Christian nation?
The only way we can describe it as a Christian nation is that historically Christians have been in the majority as far as the population is concerned. But when it was founded by these champions of the Enlightenment who were deists more than they were Christians, really. I mean,
right.
Thomas Jefferson's Bible. I don't know, you remember Eric Russ from when we were at Southern Seminary together. He talked a lot about Thomas Jefferson's Bible, which was in shreds basically, because he took out all the supernatural things there. And he was characteristic of the founding fathers, if you will, who were, they believed in God, but they believed in a deistic, distant God who created the universe and then stepped back, and let it run by natural law. So even the earliest founding fathers, at least the ones who really shaped the earliest understanding of as far as the Declaration is concerned, there were a lot of Christians, as you know. There were Baptists there that pushed through the First Amendment and so forth, separation of church and state, which now they want to do away with, But that's the only sense that we can be called a Christian nation, I think. And we have been, therefore, a nation, but all of a sudden we're not. All of a sudden, Christians have losing power. They're in the minority. They're non-affiliated. The nuns, the NONE, are gaining ascendancy, and these Christians know there's a shift, and they don't like the shift. They think it is a denial of what the heritage of America has always been. So they want to return it to its Christian heritage. But because it was not officially Christian, it can't go back there, because we're not dominantly Christian anymore.
Well, there is another reason why we can't go back, and that's because so much of our history, even though Christianity was the dominant religion, and a majority of the people were affiliated with a Christian church of some sort, much of our society and culture was conducted in violation of some really basic biblical and Christian principles. When people tell us we want to look to the past and go back to the way we were, I want to say, well, when was that? Exactly what year? When the women weren't allowed to do anything and the blacks were slaves, and any kind of immigrant anywhere was repudiated and mistreated. What time period are you talking about? This is what I want to ask them.
But think of the biblical times when they had slavery, and when women were second-class citizens, and they could not testify in court because their word was not considered trustworthy. I mean, in a lot of ways, they were actually, embodying, biblical values that were not good.
That were not good.
Yeah.
And of course, the whole history of the Bible, not all of it, but the prophetic tradition in the Bible that was constantly calling the people of the covenant, the Hebrew people, and then the followers of Jesus to live a more righteous life and to live more consistent. They always got a lot of pushback. I mean, there's just a long tradition in the Bible of the prophets getting silenced and pushed out, like we were talking about a few minutes ago in churches today.
Right. The prophets were seen as being against the Torah and being against the temple and the sacrificial system and the priesthood and all that, and I think we can maybe see what's happening today in the same way, that we still have these people that want to continue that old time religion. Then you have the prophets, that are threatening it, and they realize that they're being threatened, so they're pushing back, and that's where Christian nationalism has come out of, I think.
Yes, we could name Martin Luther King as a modern day prophet, or the William Barber, who's one of the preachers here in North Carolina, who's led the Moral Monday movement. This is several years ago, before I moved to North Carolina and started pastoring there. People like this that are calling our nation to live by its highest values in welcoming the stranger and caring for the poor and releasing the captives. One of the more interesting things in this whole movement, Christian nationalism, the two things in the book that so shook me, one was the global dynamics. I had not given this much thought. She has a whole chapter here about how the basic organizations, institutions, and personalities and ideas around which what we call Christian nationalism gathers are really part of a global movement. And much of this global movement, including its American religious leaders, looks favorably, are you ready for this, on Russia as an example of a modern day Christian nation where the Church of Russia, the Orthodox Church, is closely aligned with the government. Putin himself, proud to be a member of the Russian Orthodox Church. And together, the Russian Orthodox Church and their dictator, Putin, pushing Russian ethnic identity in much the same way that Christian nationalists in the United States are pushing our identity and pushing back against immigrants who are diluting, the American citizen and the American population.
I think there's another country even more important to Christian nationalism than Russia, and I think it's Hungary. And then maybe you've been reading about this. I mean, the Christian conservatives, the Christian nationalism has been flocking to Hungary and see Orban's rule there, prime minister, as a model. I mean, Tucker Carlson has gone there, and he's having shows about that. He is the CPAC, the conservative, Christian Action Conference, they call it, is going to be meeting there this spring. They see Hungary as a model for what they want America to be. And Hungary is, I don't know if you read the book out called The Fascism This Time. Have you read that?
No, I haven't.
By Theo Horesh. This talks about Hungary a lot. And it shows that if you want to know what these Christian nationalists want to make of America, just look at Hungary. Now, Hungary, this has been going on since he was elected prime minister in 2010. So this is 12 years. So you want to see what America is going to look like in 12 years, you look to Hungary, and it is horrific. And yet this is as the book says, the fascism this time. It's just a new form of fascism. And it's but much more closely tied to Christianity than the fascism of Germany was in the 30s, that Hitler just kind of adopted, because it fit his needs. This is from the very beginning, is really being fed by the Christianity.
Well, that is a great introduction to some program I've got to schedule in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I will do that, Marshall. Thanks for that, and thanks for being my guest today in the Meeting House. Thank to all of you for tuning in by the radio out of Southeast Georgia or through social media on Facebook and YouTube. We'd be delighted to hear from you. You can go to our website at themeetinghouse.net and write me with any message, any point or counterpoint you want to make. Thank you for joining us today. I encourage you to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God, and to join us next week in the Meeting House when we have another conversation on religion and American life. I am your host, Dwight Moody. You have a good day.
Yeah.
You have been in the Meeting House with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion and American life.